YouTube is now going. So everything should be running. I hope everybody can hear me okay. Yeah, I don't want to tell you, brother. Yep. Well, and YouTube is going because I can see it. Here we go. I can see YouTube. I can see Mixer. We're running. And Morgan has entered the area. He's not in the building yet, so he can't hear me. One of the things I've learned is when the security orb tells me somebody's on the property, they can't hear me until they actually walk through the front door. I can't holler at you standing out in the yard. It's just sort of like a real building. Well, welcome everybody. I apologize if I seem a little, if you hear grunts from me. We were out working on the windows this afternoon, and I went to come back in the house, and I missed a step up coming onto the back porch, and went down pretty hard. There was a weight bench, and I banged my head into it going down, and so I landed on my side. When I first got hurt, and when I first got hit, it wasn't that bad. I wasn't hurting. I got up and got myself looking really stupid and feeling really stupid. However, the longer the day's gone on, my ribs on my left-hand side are now starting to hurt, and my knee hurts. So if you hear me grunting, you'll know why. I don't make any excuses. I can't believe I did that. That was really stupid. But I got my feet tangled and tripped and came down. If I hadn't been for the weight bench, I probably would have hit the concrete face first. But fortunately, I used the weight bench to push off of, and that sent me out into the yard. So I came down in the grass, which is probably why I'm not hurt any more than I am. Otherwise, you might not be having service tonight. I might be at the hospital getting bandaged and broken arms and stuff. So, well, I'm so glad everybody's here tonight. I'm so glad everybody's joining us on live stream. Thank you so much for being here. No, I didn't really hit my head on anything other than the aluminum bar on the weight bench as I went down and I pushed off of it. So it's no cuts or bruises. I did have a skinned knee. 20 years ago, that wouldn't even faze me a bit. I wouldn't even talking about it, but I'm getting old. And so, that's the one thing about it. When you start getting old, you don't recover as quickly as you used to. Your body slows down. Well, let's go ahead and start in prayer. Father, we come before you. We thank you, so first off, and glorify you, because it is in your name that we honor you today. Lord, we know that we don't have any reason to say, oh, we're perfect or anything's great about us, but we know that we have a God who loves us, a God who is working with us each and every day to help us grow. Lord, as we approach our message tonight, Lord, I hope that it will have an impact on our lives. It will have an impact on those listening, an impact on those that are hearing the recording later on. What I pray most for, Lord, is that you help us each to grow. Thank you, God, that you love us. We love you. In your most precious Son's name, amen. We started last week talking about living counterculture, being a counterculture Christian, counterculture living. And in this age of outrage, where everybody's is cancel culture. Oh, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that. It's just absolutely amazing that how what I consider to be silly, but how crazy things have gotten. I don't know if you're aware of it, but they have decided that the Texas Rangers, the name Ranger is a racist name, and that the Texas Rangers baseball team should change their names because Rangers are a racist organization. Well, I know for a fact they're not. Texas Rangers is a law enforcement organization in Texas that operate a great deal like the Secret Service or the FBI. But, it's just gotten out of hand. It's gotten insane. We've got governors and mayors threatening to arrest federal agents if they arrest lawbreakers, and it's just an insane place. And so I want to focus on how we as believers should react to all this. So, and I don't know whether you know this or not, but God has a lot to say in the Bible about kindness. And so tonight we're going to talk about having counterculture kindness. Okay? You're learning to be kind is a big deal because God is kind. Everything you have in your life, you owe to the kindness of God. And in a rude world where people are bad-mannered and uncivil and more unpolarized than ever before, to be kind is actually to be counterculture. God has this to say in 1 Thessalonians 5:15. Make sure that you never pay back one wrong with another wrong. Instead, always try to be kind to each other and to everyone else. Now, friends, that is counterculture in today's world. To not do tit for tat, to not retaliate, to not fight back, to not return one wrong for another, but to always be kind to each other and to everyone else. I mean, I don't know if you realize this, but you've got far more, you put far more effort into looking nice than in being nice. You do. You spend more time in front of the mirror making sure your appearance is right than you spend time in front of God making sure your attitude is right. Now, I wonder, if I were to ask people who know you best, and I'm not kidding, I mean, what quality are you best known for among your friends and your neighborhood? What quality are you best known for at work or at school or wherever you are? I wonder what they would say. What quality would they say? Now, God is very clear that He wants people to say about you. The next verse, Philippians 4:5, says, your kindness should be known to all. Got that? As God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. I want you to be men and women of kindness. I want you to be famous for your kindness. I want our church family. I want us collectively be known as that is the kindest church on the planet. They may not get everything right, but you know what? When you mess up, they really treat you with kindness in that place. That's the kindest church on earth. That would be a good reputation to have because God is very, very clear about what He wants you and me to be known for. Everything you must be done with love. 1 Corinthians 6:14. You get that? If we do everything with love, the reality is that kindness is love in action. That's what kindness is. Kindness is just love in action. Kindness is not emotion. Kindness is not just how you feel. You might have all kinds of what you think you're feeling. But if you don't ever act in a kind way, you're not kind. Kindness is not something you feel towards someone. Kindness is something you do towards someone. It is an activity, it is an event, and it is an action. Kindness is love in action. Now, this is so important in your life that God had Jesus tell a very famous story about it. In fact, probably the most famous story in the entire Bible is called the story of the Good Samaritan. We've heard that story. We've seen all sorts of different versions of it. He told the story to explain what it means to be kind, because we don't really understand kindness. We think we know, but we don't really understand it, and it's called the Good Samaritan. Now, I've seen all sorts of versions of the Good Samaritan. My particular favorite, outside of the original story that Jesus told, the best adaptation I remember of it was on VeggieTales. And the carrots lived in one city, and the cucumbers lived in another. And, the carrots hated all the people who were in the cucumber city. And one day, this kid from the cucumber city is going somewhere, and he's traveling down the road, and he gets attacked by and one of the carrots comes out and saves him when nobody else would. Now, that title doesn't make sense if you don't know the background. The Samaritans were a different race from the Jews, and they both lived in Israel, and they were both guilty of racial prejudice. They were both bigoted against each other. The Jews hated the Samaritans, and the Samaritans hated the Jews. There was a lot of racial profiling, there was a lot of bigotry, there was a lot of racism. In fact, one of the phrases of Jews in that day was, it's better to be a dog than it is to be a Samaritan. That's how much animosity there was between these two groups. See, part of the problem was that the Jews believed that the Samaritans had been corrupted. Yeah, they were a different race, but the Samaritans were descendants of northern Israel. And they had intermarried, and they had violated. The Jews felt like they had violated Scripture, and they no longer worshipped in the temple, and they had added pagan customs. And so, basically, even though Samaritans were originally part of the northern tribe, because that's what Damascus is, by the way, it was the capital of the northern kingdom. They didn't believe they were true Jews anymore, and so they considered them half-breeds, basically. They hated them. Now, Jesus turns the tables, and he does the opposite of what people expect, and he makes the bad guy in the Jewish idea the hero of the story. He makes the hero of the story the person who is despised to be who is an outcast, who is prejudiced against. He does this because Jesus was never ever politically correct. Never. He didn't care about political correctness. He cared about being correct, not politically correct. So if you're living your life as a believer and saying, I don't want to offend anybody, I got news for you. Jesus Christ was not politically correct. He told it like he saw it. Because it is not kindness to tell somebody, oh, you're not going to hell because I don't want to upset you, and then they go to hell. I'm sorry, that's not kindness. As far as I'm concerned, that's the meanest, nastiest thing you can do to anybody. You don't want anybody. I don't want my worst enemies to go to hell. And when I refuse to tell them, what I'm saying is, I'm sentencing you to hell, and I don't care about you. I don't love you. I'm not going to be kind to you. Now, he tells his story. He sets up the story because of a question he's asked. Here in the screen in Luke chapter 10, it says, okay, one day an expert in the religious law stood up to test Jesus by asking him a question. He says, Teacher, what must I do to receive eternal life? Pretty good question. How do I get to heaven? And how do I receive eternal life? And Jesus says, well, what does the law of Moses say? And the man answered, well, the law of Moses says this, you must love the Lord. You must love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and all your strength and all your mind. And you have to love your neighbor as yourself. That's called the Great Commandment. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Now, there's two parts to that you need to understand. Number one, and this is the part we focus on. We'll talk about loving our neighbor. But let me take a side note. Let me take a side trip here. Okay. If you don't love yourself, you can't love your neighbor. If you absolutely despise and hate yourself, so Jesus is saying you need to learn to love yourself enough to surrender yourself to me. And I'm not talking about being so narcissistic that you don't care about anybody else. Because remember, there's two sides of that. You're supposed to be loving your neighbor as much as you love yourself. Which means you need to show love. You need to love yourself because you are a child of God. You can't hate yourself because God doesn't hate you. God redeemed you. He loved you so much that he sent his son to die for you. So, that's called the Great Commandment. Love God with all your heart. Jesus goes, that's right. Bingo. Good answer. Ding, ding, ding. You won the car. He says, do this and you'll live. But the man wanted to justify his action. So he said, Jesus, who's my neighbor? And Jesus answered by telling him a story. Now, what's going on here? The guy doesn't want to have to love everybody. And he said, certainly, when you say love your neighbor as yourself, you're not talking about the whole world. You don't make me to love people like the Romans, do you? I don't like them. You don't expect me to love my enemies. You don't expect me to love people who are different from me, who think differently, act differently, live differently, different races, different languages. No, surely you can't mean that. When they say love your neighbor, that can't mean everybody. It just means the people, right? What's he doing? He's looking for a loophole. Like you've never done this with the command of God. Well, God, I want to love my neighbor, but they're just so mean and nasty that I just can't love them. Wrong, buzzer. That's wrong answer. God says, love your neighbor as yourself. Love the Lord your God, and the way you demonstrate you love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, strength, and is by loving your neighbor. Okay? So when God says, this is what I want you to do, and you go, well, is there a little loophole here? Is there a grandfather cause? Is there a little way out? Because I don't happen to like this. It's too general, too generic. I'm going to have to love everybody like I love myself. That's a radical kind of love, to love everybody as myself, because it means I am to love everybody else as much as I love myself. You got to be kidding me. Really? So it's a radical concept, and he's trying to reduce his responsibility. I don't want to have to love everybody. Especially I don't want to have to love enemies. Especially I don't want to have to love people like me. He says, so who's my neighbor? And Jesus answers this question with this story. Now the story is that this guy is going from Jericho down to Jerusalem on the road. I've been on this road before. I've seen this road before in pictures. The road from Jericho to Jerusalem is like coming down a mountain. It's like coming down the Big Bear in San Bernardino or driving down I-70 in Colorado when you're going down 70 down the mountain from Grand Lake. Sorry, I can't even think of the name of it. It's a huge, steep incline, and they're coming down this. It's a very curvy road, lots of curves, and thieves and robbers were famous for being in there because it's a good way to ambush you. When travelers would go from Jericho down to Jerusalem, they would often get robbed, raped, beat up, tortured, all kinds of stuff because there were plenty of places to hide in those little crooked roads. And the criminals lived out there. Now, this one guy, he gets beat up by a bunch of bandits and he's left for dead on the side of the road. And there's 3 more travelers come down and they see the guy who's been hurt by the side of the road. The first 2 pay no attention to the guy. They just blow him off. The third guy actually helps him, and he's called the Good Samaritan. He was a Samaritan. And he's the bad guy, actually, in this culture. He's the guy that a Samaritan helping a Jew would be like a black guy helping saving the life of a Ku Klux Klan member. Or a Holocaust survivor helping save the life of a Nazi concentration camp guard. And it's the exact opposite of what you would expect. He tells this story and he says there's 3 different guys. There's a priest, he's the Levite, and there's a Samaritan. They all encounter this crime scene when they're going from Jericho down to Jerusalem. Each of these 3 people represents an attitude. Now I want you to be clear, you're not one of these. Oh, I'm the Samaritan. No. You can have all 3 of these attitudes in the same day. You can act like the first guy at one moment, and the second guy in the next moment, and the third guy in the other one. So don't go, well, that's me, or number 3, I'm the good guy. No. You have all 3 of these attitudes in your exact same day. And all 3 of us are guilty of doing stuff like this all the time. So let's take a look at each. Each of these attitudes represents 3 possible attitudes toward people that you could express, as I said, in 3 different situations. Let's look at the 3 attitudes. The first guy is the priest. He's a first traveler. And here's what we learn from the priest. This attitude is that I can keep my distance attitude. It's the attitude of avoidance. He sees the guy and he really doesn't want to get close to him. He goes over to the other side of the road. In fact, he gets as far away from him as he can. Luke 10:30-31, it says this. And there was a man who was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when robbers attacked him and stripped him and beat him and leaving him half dead. So he's naked, he's half dead, all of his belongings have been stolen. Now it so happened that a priest was going down that same road. But when he saw the man who was in pain, he walked on by on the other side. Now this is the attitude of avoidance, and we're all guilty of it at one time or another. If I don't pay attention, then it's not my responsibility. I can just ignore it. The guy's walking down the road, he sees a man left half dead, naked, bleeding to death, and instead of helping the guy, he gets as far on the other side of the road as he can get and keeps walking. Out of sight, out of mind. He's just going to avoid it. I'm going to keep my distance. That's why I moved to the other side of the road, to keep my distance. If I ignore it, I don't have to do anything about it. I don't have to pay attention. I'm not responsible. Now, a lot of people actually live this way, and it's this. Don't get too close to people, so then you don't have to help them when they're in pain. Don't get close. Keep all your relationships shallow. Don't really get involved in people's lives, your neighbor's lives, your friend's life, your small group's lives. Just keep all your relationships official so you don't have to get involved, because if you get close, you may actually have to help them. Stick to your own business. That way you can avoid a whole lot of hurt. Keep your distance. Stay distracted. Now, in cities like we live, it's pretty easy to do this, to keep your distance from people. You can actually live next to people for a long, long time and not get involved in their lives. We actually live in a culture that makes it easy to do this. Keep my distance, avoidance style. And I'll tell you right now that the pandemic isn't bothering a lot of people because they've gotten so used to not having anything to do with their neighbors. Seriously, I want you to think about this. And you may be unique, but who are your neighbors? I mean, can you name them? Do you know who they are? Do you know what's going on in their lives? Do you know if they're sick or they're hurting or they're struggling financially? Do you know what they're going through right now? Maybe they're struggling maritally and they're husband and wife and they're getting ready to get divorced. Maybe the husband's lost his job and they're hurting and they need somebody to come and encourage them, and you don't have clues what's going on and you're too busy with your own life to get involved. You see, we don't realize how many people around us are hurting because we don't see them. Did you know that in the state of California, 6 million people live below the poverty line? 6 million. That's bigger than most states. The number of poor people in California is bigger than most states in America. And yet, have you ever seen them? What about the poor in your communities? What about the homeless living on the streets? What about the orphans and the widows and that are just not making it? Do you get involved? Are you engaged? Do you care what happens to them? or you're just too busy with your own life to worry about it. And you know why you never see them? Because you live on the other side of the street and you walk on to the other side of the road. It's easy to live this way. That's avoidance. And that's the first attitude. I'm going to keep my distance. When I see somebody in pain, I just walk on the other side of the road and keep walking because I'm busy with what I'm doing. I'm preoccupied with me. Yeah, this third attitude is the attitude of avoidance. It's the attitude of apathy. I can be curious, but I'm uncaring. In other words, I see the needs of people around me, and I'm not oblivious to them. I can actually see that I'm just too self-centered to help. I just don't care. Look, guys, prior to 1929, the Great Depression, if somebody got sick, somebody lost their job, somebody didn't know how to make it, they didn't go to the government. They went to the church. And the church was known that they would reach out and they would help, and no questions asked. You're hurting and you're in need, we will reach out and help you. 19th century, 18th century, that's where you went. If you were struggling and hurting, you went to the church because the church is the one who took care of the poor. Nowadays, most churches could care less what happens to the poor. And I'm not trying to be funny or mean. I'm going to tell you the honest truth. I've seen it happen more often. Well, you're important to our church because you give lots of money. Oh, that guy over there, he doesn't really give, so we don't really care what happens to him. Oh, he's been gone for 6 weeks? Oh, we didn't know. He was in the hospital? No, we didn't care. We didn't come and see him. We didn't have one thing to do with him. You know why? Because we just don't care. Because he doesn't meet our expectations. I'm aware and I stare, but I don't care. That's the second attitude. Luke 10:32. In the same way, all right, come on, change pages. In the same way, a Levite also came there. Went over and looked at the man, but walked on the other side. Okay. Now, notice the difference between these first two guys. He actually went and looked, and he walked by but walked by on the other side. By the way, a Levite is not a Levi jean salesperson. It means he's a temple priest. Both of these guys, the priest and the Levite, are religious people. Being religious doesn't make you nice. Being religious doesn't make you kind. You could go to church all your life and be a miserable person with other people. Some of the most unkind people I know were church attenders. Being religious doesn't make you kind. Being like Christ is what makes you kind. Now, the first guy is the priest. He's walking down the other side of the road. He sees this man naked, bleeding, half dead, and he goes, I'm just going to walk over here, walk on the other side, and keep going. I'm going to totally ignore him. I avoid him. The second guy's a Levite, and he says this. He's walking down the side of the road and sees the guy over there naked, bleeding to death. He walks over and stares at him. Very interesting. This is worse. He's curious, but he's uncaring. He sees the victim, and he stares at the victim, but he doesn't help the victim. Notice verse 2. In the same way, the Levite came there, went over, looked at the man, but when he walked on by on the other side, he sees the victim, he stares at the victim, but he doesn't really care. Well, shoot, I'd never do that, you say. Oh, really? What about freeway accidents? Have you gone by, slowed down, looked, craned your neck because you were curious? You look and you stare, and then you just keep on going. You don't stop. You didn't stop, and 30 seconds later, you've forgotten it. You were curious, but you didn't care because you didn't stop. We do all this all the time, and people in pain around us, in freeway accidents, nobody cares. Nobody stops. Curiosity stares. Kindness stops. I told you many times that a lot of people like to study in the steps of Jesus. I like to study the steps of Jesus. What did Jesus allow to interrupt him? What was he willing to stop for? Because in the Bible, almost every miracle happens as a result of an interruption. What stopped Jesus? What stops you in the middle of your work to stop and care about somebody else? You see, what I'm saying is this. We love to read about pain of other people. That's why gossip magazines and gossip TV shows are so popular. Why should you care about the divorce of somebody famous? Why should you care about the scandal of somebody famous? Why should you read something like People magazine or some other magazine that are just about the problems other people have? We love to read about other people's problems. You know why? We love to gossip. We just don't want to help people with their problems. We like to talk about them, but we don't care to help. See, what we really need is a little bit more TLC and a little less TMZ. Let me show you a verse. Up on Exodus 23:5. If you see the donkey of someone who hates you, you're not talking about a donkey of your best friend. You're talking about a donkey of your enemy. If you see the donkey of someone who hates you has fallen under a heavy load, do not walk by. Instead, stop. Remember you've got to stop and offer to help. He says, we're walking by and you see somebody you can't stand because they can't stand you. And there's an animal that's fallen under a deep load or fallen in a ditch, and you do the humane thing. You be kind to animals. You do the humane thing and you help that animal get out of the ditch. You help that donkey get the heavy load off its back. Now, if God wants you to be humane and kind to animals, don't you think he wants you to be kind and humane to people? Yes, you should be humane and kind to animals, but people are more important than animals. Far more important. And God says you be kind not just to animals, but you be kind to everybody. See, as a believer, I'm not allowed to hate anybody. Let me say that again because I want you to be clear on that. As a believer, I am not to be identified as my hate. I don't get a loophole out of that. As a believer, I am informed, I am commanded by God to love everybody and to be kind to everyone. I don't get any loophole. I don't have to agree with everybody. I don't have to approve of everything they do. They may not like me. They may be mean to me, and I'm not allowed to be mean to them if I claim to be a Christian. I am commanded to God to be kind to everybody. I treat everybody with dignity and respect. I don't have to agree with what they believe in, how they live, what their lifestyle is, how they vote, when their political persuasion is. Don't matter. I'm just supposed to treat them with dignity and kindness, and I'm not allowed to be unkind to anybody. That's what it means. We believe it. In fact, the Bible says, let him who names the name of the Lord depart from iniquity. It means if you're going to call yourself a Christian, that you should do the right thing. If you're not doing the right thing, stop calling yourself a Christian. Because you're bad advertising for the rest of us. There are Christians out there who are being unkind on the internet every day, and they're a bad witness, and they're tainting everyone else. And I'm going to confess to you that I've caught myself, as I've studied this, and realized that some of the stuff I said on Facebook is unkind. And I confess that to you. Because you know what? I'm a servant of God. Oh, so are you. I'm not the only one here. And I don't have to curse and scream. I can say some nasty stuff on the computer and accuse people of being liars and thieves and everything else. But you know what? That's not my job. They may be liars, but I have to find a way to be positive, to approach them with kindness, not to resort to name-calling. That's probably the thing that disturbs me most about the Christian I've told you about, this believer in Chicago, who says, I'm a believer, but because I'm white, I can't be a believer in Jesus Christ because white people are spawns of Satan, and he hates me. And I'm like, wait a minute. How can you possibly... I'm a follower of Jesus Christ just like you. And I got to wonder, if you can hate like that, if you can hate your brother who you've seen, how can you claim to love God whom you haven't seen? Now, I can be this first guy, be distance, keep my distance, be vigilant, be avoidance. I can be curious and uncaring. That's apathy. Or there's a third thing. Or I can be like this Good Samaritan, and that is this. I can show kindness. Write that down. That is the third response. Kindness is love in action. I can show kindness. But the Samaritan who was traveling that way came across the man, and when he saw him, his heart was filled with pity. Now, as I said, Jesus loved to turn the tables. This is a guy who is despised probably by the very man who has been hurt. Yet he is the hero in the story. The guy helping a Jew would be like a black man helping Ku Klux Klan, saving the guy's life. Or it would be like a Jew who had survived the Holocaust helping a Nazi war criminal and saving their life when that person probably wanted to kill them. It's the ultimate example of true kindness, of biblical kindness. Now in Matthew 7:12, here on the screen it says, excuse me, Luke 10:33, never mind, a Samaritan who was traveling that way came upon the man, and when he saw him, his heart was filled with what? Pity. That's the heart of kindness. Now, what is the basis for this? The next verse, Matthew 7:12. Jesus says, always treat others as you would treat them, like them to treat you. You know this. It's called the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Always treat other people in the way you want to be treated. How do you want to be treated? With kindness. Then how are you commanded to treat everyone else? With kindness. I'm not allowed to treat other people in any way I don't want to be treated. Now, why should I always be kind? Well, there are a couple of reasons. First, God says that if you're unkind, your life will be unproductive. If you're unkind, your life will be unproductive. It will be barren. Look at this verse, Galatians 6:7. The person who plants selfishness lives totally for themselves, ignoring the needs of others. Harvest is a crop of weeds, and all he will have to show for his life is weeds. I could show you testimonies of guys that I know who when they were married, they had kids, they had paid no attention to their wife or their kids. They were living totally for themselves and end up in divorce, estranged from their kids, and now in old age their life is barren, full of weeds. Why? Because they were planting seeds of selfishness their whole life. My life will be unproductive if I'm not kind. In other words, God says, I will bless your life if you're kind. The more kind you are as a man or a woman, the kinder you are. God says, you will be a blessing to other people, and I'm going to bless your life. Look at the verse, Proverbs 11:17. Your own soul is nourished when you're kind. When you do an act of kindness, remember, it's not an emotion. It's something you do for somebody, even if you don't feel like it. You do an act of kindness. Nobody else may even see it. Nobody else may even know it, but God sees it, and he says, I'm going to make sure you get blessed for that. Your own soul will be nourished. One day, a woman was walking down the street when she spied a beggar sitting on the corner. The man was elderly, unshaven, and ragged, and he stunk. And as he sat there, pedestrians gave him a wide berth, giving him dirty looks. They clearly wanted nothing to do with him because of who he was, a dirty, homeless man. But when she saw him, the woman was moved to compassion. It was very cold that day, and the woman had this tattered coat, and the man had this tattered coat, more like an old suit coat rather than a warm coat wrapped around him. She stopped and looked at him and said, Sir, she asked, are you all right? The man slowly looked up. This was a woman clearly accustomed to the finer things of life. Her coat was new. She looked like she had never missed a meal in her life. His first thought that she wanted to make fun of him, so like so many others had done before, and he growled, Leave me alone. To his amazement, the woman continued standing. She was smiling. Her even white teeth displayed in dazzling rolls. Are you hungry? She asked. No, he answered sarcastically. I'm just come from dining with the president. Now go away. The woman's smile became even broader. Suddenly the man felt a gentle hand on his arm. What are you doing, lady? The man asked angrily. I said to leave me alone. Just then a policeman came up. Is there a problem here, ma'am? He asked. No problem, officer, the woman answered. I'm just trying to get this man to his feet. Will you help me? The officer scratched his head. That's old Jack. He's been a fixture around here for a couple of years. What do you want with him? See that cafeteria over there, she said. I'm going to get him something to eat and get him out of the cold for a while. Are you crazy, lady? The homeless man resisted. I don't want to go in there. Then he felt strong hands grab his other arm and lift him up. Let me go, officer. I didn't do anything. This is a good deal for you, Jack, the officer answered. Don't blow it. Finally, with some difficulty, the woman and the police officer got Jack into the cafeteria and sat him down at a table in a remote corner. It was the middle of the morning, so most of the breakfast crowd was already left, and the lunch bunch had not yet arrived. The manager ran over to the cafeteria, stood at the table, and says, What's going on here, officer? He asked. What is all this? Is this man in trouble? The lady brought this man in here to be fed, the policeman said. Not in here, the manager cried. Having a person like that is bad for business. Old Jack smiled a toothless grin. See, lady, I told you so. Now if you'll let me go, I don't want to come here in the first place. The woman turned to the cafeteria manager and said, Sir, are you familiar with Eddy and Associates, the banking firm down the street? Of course I am, the young manager managed impatiently. They hold their weekly meetings in one of my banquet rooms. And do you make a good profit from providing food at that weekly meeting? What business of that is yours, lady? Well, sir, I am Penelope Eddy, president and CEO of the Eddy and Associates banking firm. Oh. The woman smiled again. I thought that might make a difference. She glanced at the cop who was busily stifling a giggle. Would you like to join us in a cup of coffee and a meal, officer? No thanks, ma'am, the officer replied. I'm on duty. Then perhaps a cup of coffee to go. Yes, ma'am, that would be very nice. The cafeteria manager turned and walked on his heel. I bet your coffee for you right way, officer. The officer watched him walk away. "You certainly put him in his place," he said. "Well, that wasn't my intent. Believe it or not, I have a reason for all this." She sat down at the table across from her amazed dinner guest. She stared at him intently. "Jack, do you remember me?" Old Jack stopped and searched her face with his old, rheumy eyes. "I think so. I mean, you do look familiar." "I'm a little older, perhaps," she said. "Maybe I even filled out more than in my younger days when you worked here. And I came through that very door cold and hungry." "Ma'am," the officer said questioningly. He couldn't believe that such a magnificently turned out woman could ever have been hungry. "I was just out of college," the woman began. "I'd come to the city looking for a job, but I couldn't find anything. Finally, it was down to my last few cents and I had to be kicked out of my apartment. I walked the streets for days. It was February and I was cold and nearly starving. I saw this place and walked in off the chance that I could get something to eat." Jack lit up with a smile. "Oh, now I remember. I was behind the serving counter. You came up and asked me if you could work for something to eat. I said that it was against company policy." "I know," the woman continued. "You made the biggest roast beef sandwich that I'd ever seen. Gave me a cup of coffee and told me to go over to the corner table and enjoy it. I was afraid that you would get in trouble. Then when I looked over, I saw you put the price of my food in the cash register. I knew that everything would be all right." "So you started your own business?" old Jack said. "I got a job that afternoon. I worked my way up. Eventually I started my own business that, with the help of God, prospered." She opened her purse and pulled out a business card. "When you're finished here, I want you to pay a visit to Mr. Lyons. He's the personnel director of my company. I'll go talk to him now, and I'm certain he'll find something for you to do around the office." She smiled. "I think he might even find the funds to give you a little advance so you can buy some clothes and get a place to live until you get on your feet. And if you need anything, ever, my door is always open to you." There were tears in the old man's eyes. "How can I ever thank you?" he said. "Don't thank me," the woman said. "God gets the glory for this. Thank Jesus he led me to you." Outside the cafeteria, the officer woman paused at the entrance before going their separate ways. "Thank you for all your help, officer," she said. "On the contrary, Miss Eddy," he answered. "Thank you. I saw a miracle today, something I will never forget, and thank you for the coffee." She frowned. "I forgot to ask whether you use cream or sugar." "That's black." The officer looked at the steaming cup and off and he says, "Yes, I do keep shaving sugar, perhaps more sugar than is good for me." He patted his ample stomach. "I'm sorry," she said. "I don't need it now," he said, smiling. "I've got the feeling this coffee you bought me is going to taste as sweet as any sugar could ever make it." So how do you become a kinder person? How can you be a man? How can you as a man or a woman be a kinder man or a kinder woman? When you become famous and they go, "That is the kindest person in our neighborhood. That's the kindest woman in our neighborhood." Well, this passage gives you 4 incredibly powerful truths. This story that Jesus told is packed with wisdom. I want to take you through these 4 steps to become a kinder person. Number 1, it starts with your vision. It starts with the way you think. First, I must see the needs of people around me. I must see the need. In verse 33, this is the first thing the Good Samaritan does. He observes, he looks, he notices, he's aware. Luke 10:33, and when he saw the man's condition, his heart went out to him. He starts by seeing things you've been missing. Love begins with looking. Sensitivity begins with seeing. You can't care until you're first aware. You've got to start noticing the people in pain around you that you haven't noticed. Kindness always starts with your eyes, by the way you look at people. It starts with observation. You can't meet a need until you first see a need. And if you don't see it, you can't meet it. So first you must see the needs of the people around you. Friends, people are around us all the time. They're around you right now. People that you see at work or in your neighborhood, they're hurting. They're deeply wounded because everybody has a secret wound. Nobody goes through life unwounded. Everybody has wounds. Emotional wounds, trauma wounds, financial wounds, relational wounds. Okay? Spiritual wounds, mental wounds, physical wounds. Everybody is wounded on a different area. Now the truth is, you don't see the wounds of people around you very often. Why? Well, there's 2 reasons. They're hiding them and you're in a hurry. First, they're hiding them. People hide their grief. People hide their loneliness. People hide their insecurity. People hide their depression. People hide their pain. People hide their wounds. But we need to learn to look for the good in others. The reality is, We all are guilty of that at one time or another. We're so busy with our lives. We're such in a hurry that we don't see the person sitting in the corner all alone. Nobody cares what happens to them, and you're just too busy to care. You just don't notice it because you don't have your eyes open. You're not paying any attention. The second reason is because you're in a hurry, and hurry is the death of kindness. When I'm in a hurry, I have a hard time being kind. When I slow down a little bit, I can be a lot kinder. When I have to fly somewhere in the world on a plane, I've discovered that when I give plenty of time and get to the airport in plenty of time, I can be nice to everybody. It's nice to be I'm nice to the ticket agent and nice to the baggage claim. I'm nice to the coffee guy. I stop and take pictures with people. I have a good old time. I make friends with the taxi driver. I talk to him about his life. Why? Because I'm not in a hurry. But if I'm late and I'm rushing to get to an airplane, sorry, I don't have time to stop and notice you. I'm in a hurry. So hurry is the death of kindness. Write this down. The slower I go, the more I'll see. The slower I go, the more I'll see. You see, I can't be bothered if I'm busy. You got your problem, I got mine. I'm in a hurry. I can't be bothered if I'm busy. So I'm going to be more kind. I'm going to have to figure out how to not be so busy. The slower I go, the more I see. See, years ago, there was a kid named Freddie Prinze Jr. Freddie Prinze was a comedian. He starred in a program called Chico and the Man a really long time ago, and I'm really old. Freddie Prinze killed himself. He committed suicide. Had everything going for him. Life of luxury. On his way home, on the very night he went home and killed himself, he was sitting on a plane, and there was a preacher there. He was just sitting in the row next to him, sitting right next to the guy. And he had his stuff out. He was preparing his notes. He was supposed to speak at a conference, and so he had all this stuff out, going over what he was supposed to say. And the guy, Freddie, leaned over to him and asked him, "So what do you do?" And he told him, "I'm a pastor." And Freddie said, "Is there any way I can talk to you?" He says, "Well, I'd love to talk to you right now, but I'm just so busy. I've got to have this done. I'll tell you what, I'll give you my card. You can call me tomorrow, and I'll be glad to talk to you." He was too busy to listen and too busy to care. That night, Freddie Prinze went home, put a gun in his mouth, and pulled the trigger. Killed himself. And he reached out for somebody to care, and the person he reached out to was too busy to listen. The first step to being kind is seeing. It means you've got to slow down. You've got to slow down. The slower I go, the more I'll see. Look out for the good of others. Okay? So the first step to kindness is to ask God to give you spiritual radar and pray. God, help me to see people the way you see them. Help me to see people the way you see them, and help me to always be on the lookout for the person in pain, the person in need, for those who need some kindness. I remember one time many years ago when I was still doing youth ministry. This kid came up to me. He said, "Pastor, last week I needed somebody to talk to, but every time I approached you, you were too busy. I was breaking, my heart was breaking, and I wanted somebody to talk to you, and you just didn't have time for me." Because I just didn't see her. So I pray, God, help me be on the lookout. Some of us need to pray, God, we have a spiritual attention deficit disorder. We have a spiritual attention deficit, and we don't see what you're doing. We don't see the pain in the people around us. It requires a little effort, but I tell you what, I will tell you this, you can learn it. I'm learning it. You can learn it too. As a man or a woman, I have to first see their pain. So, number two, the second step is I need to become a really kind person. Number two, I need to learn to be sympathetic. I have to see their need, and then I have to sympathize with their pain. Seeing their need is observation, and being sensitive or sympathizing to their pain has to do with your emotions. See, kindness isn't just seeing a pain. Kindness is sympathizing with the pain. It's not enough just to know what people's needs are. You've got to feel their emotion. And when he saw them, his heart was filled with what? Compassion. Weep with those who weep, and rejoice with those who rejoice. It's, in other words, you should mirror and mimic the emotions of people around you. So if somebody's in pain, then you share that pain. If somebody's happy, you should celebrate and be happy with them. God even created what is called in your brain mirror neutrons that allow you to feel the emotion of other people. So why, when you watch something on a movie and somebody gets kissed and you can feel that kiss, somebody gets mad, you get angry. That's called mirror neurons. God wired you with that ability. So don't shut it down in your life. Everybody has mirror neurons in their brain. So your heart must be filled with compassion. That's okay. How do you get that? How do you become a more sympathetic person? 2 words. How do you become a more sympathetic person? Here it is. Listen better. You see, sympathy is a matter of your ear. Seeing is a matter of your eye. Sympathy is a matter of your ear. When I see with my eyes, but I sympathize with my ears. Your ears are some of the greatest healing tools God gave you. You can actually heal people by just listening to them. Some people, all they need is somebody to be a listening ear. They don't need your advice. They just need attention. They need a listening ear. And sometimes love is just listening. You don't try to give any advice. You just listen. Everybody in the world has 2 fundamental basic needs. Every man, woman, or doesn't matter. Everybody has a need to be understood. And everybody has a need to know that somebody cares and listens to them. Everybody needs to know that needs to be validated, and that has to do with your emotions. Like somebody goes and not only understand you, but you're not weird for thinking that. I validate you. The fear you have, the concern you have, the emotion you have, the anger you have, I get it. Makes sense to me. You need to be validated. Both of these great needs are met by listening. When you listen to somebody and you pay attention and you say, I understand and you validate them. You've given them an enormous gift and you have been kind at that moment. A long time ago I read a poem and I thought it was good. When I asked you to listen to me and you start giving me advice, you haven't done what I've asked. When I ask you to listen to me and you begin to tell me why I shouldn't feel that way, you trample on my feelings. When I asked you to listen to me and you feel you have to do something to solve my problem, you failed me. Strange as it may seem. Just listen, advice is cheap. I can go out and buy a newspaper with both Dear Abby and Billy Graham's advice column in the same paper. And I can do that for myself, and I'm not helpless, and I may be discouraged, and I may be faltering, but I'm not helpless. So please, just listen. And if you want to talk, well, then wait a minute for your turn, and I'll listen to you. That is kindness. Joseph Bailey was a great preacher, and he wrote a great book called A View from the Hearse. He said this. He was talking about the death of his son. I was sitting torn by grief. Somebody came in and talked to me about God's dealings and why it had happened and the hope beyond the grave. He talked constantly. He said things I knew that were true, but I was unmoved except to wish that he'd go away. And finally he left. Then another came in and sat beside me in my grief. He didn't talk. He didn't ask me leading questions. He just sat beside me for an hour and more listened when I said something, answered briefly, and prayed simply and left. And I was more moved and comforted, and I hated him to see him go. Folks, that's kindness. One of the reasons we're not sensitive to other people is because we don't look at where they've come from. We look at how far they've got to go. The people who listen to me really closely on this, the people who irritate you at work, at school, sitting next to you, you don't look at them. Anywhere people who irritate you or just have a hard time getting along with and just butt heads a lot for whatever, the problem is you're asking the wrong questions. What you always do is we look at how far people still have to go, but we don't give them credit for how they've already come. So you don't give them grace. You don't know the trauma they've been through. You don't know the hard situation they grew up with. You don't know the pain they're carrying now, and you're just judging them based on how far they need to go. All of us are like Paul, who could say, thank God I'm not what I used to be. Thank God I'm not what I am. Thank God I'm not what I'm going to be. You're in all three stages of your life, and you need to love you and accept you and show you respect at all three stages. So when you're having a hard time accepting somebody whose behavior is not helpful to you, I want you to write this down. Stop asking what is wrong with them and start asking what happened to them. That's kindness. Stop asking what's wrong and start asking what happened. Then you're going to be a little bit more gracious, a little bit kind, and when you understand the hurt they've been through. You work with people who have broken branches. You have broken branches. After the hurricane, we lost 2 trees in my yard, and they looked horrible. And somebody came down the street and says, well, you need to do something about those trees. They look horrible. It's because they had broken branches, and we're dealing with people with broken branches. Thank God I'm not what I'm going to be. You have broken branches, and you're not cute yourself. I'm sorry, that wasn't kind. All right, so sometimes you have to, okay, but you get the point. We've all had rogue winds come through our life and break things. We've all had brokenness. And the question is not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you. When you understand what happened, you cut people slack and you give them grace. How many times have you heard people say this? Hurt people, hurt people. Happy people don't hurt people. Your mom hurt you because she's been hurt. Your dad hurt you because he was hurt. Happy people don't hurt people. Hurt people hurt people. So stop asking what's wrong with them and start asking what happened to them. Everybody's got trauma in their lives. Does that make sense? Get it. Good. Galatians 6:4. Share each other's troubles. 6:2. Share each other's troubles and problems, and in this way you obey the law of Christ. What's the law of Christ? Love your neighbor as yourself. I got this, The reality is that we all hear and see things that we know are not right. When I was still doing as a youth pastor, we had this kid in my youth group. Oh, he was a pain in the neck. I was ready to throw him out because he was disruptive and loud and noisy, and he wouldn't let you preach, he wouldn't let you teach, and he was just distracting the rest of the kids. He was mean and miserable to everybody, and I was never quite sure why he came to youth group because none of his family were believers. He was the only person who had anything to do with church whatsoever, and he obviously was filled with anger and hatred, and he took it out on us. I had been teaching about loving your neighbor, and I've been talking to my kids about that, and one of the girls came up to me and says, Pastor Mike, I want to love that kid. I want to show him the love of God. Will you pray for me? Because I'm going to reach out to him and show him the kindness of God. And she befriended him. Oh, he was mean and he was miserable, and that took a long time. Finally, one day, she brought him to me. She says, Pastor Mike, would you pray with us? He's accepted Jesus as his Savior and Lord, and he's afraid to go home and tell his parents because they hate him. His dad is a drunk, and he lives in a hotel on the other side of town. His mom remarried, and they have a young daughter, and they kick him out of the house all the time. That's the reason he comes to youth group, because he's nowhere else to go. He basically is not allowed at the house unless he's sleeping at night. They don't care if he's fed. They don't take care of anything. And we sat and we prayed with him. He was 14 years old. His mom was too busy for him, and his dad was too drunk to care. We prayed with him. We helped him find places to stay, made sure he had food, took care of every need that he had. When he got to be 18, his mom kicked him out of the house, wanted nothing to do with him. That was okay by that point. He'd learned to trust Jesus Christ. He came to me and said, Pastor Mike, can you help me find a place to live? My mom's kicked me out. And I went with him and we house hunted for him. And the kids in my youth group found out what was going on and raised the money to pay his deposit so he could move into this apartment. And they helped him move. Do you know where that young man is now? All because somebody showed him kindness and love. Who reached out to him when he was hurting and in need. I'll tell you where he is. He's pastoring a church in Georgia now. Not a big one. But he has been radically transformed. I met his 2 kids shortly before I left Del Rio. He came up to me, I didn't hardly recognize him. Even though he writes me and calls me, I hadn't seen him in a long time because he lives in Georgia and full-time ministry. All because a young lady in my church decided she wanted to obey Jesus and reached out to a kid who we were ready to kick out of the building. I will tell you right now that I was so humbled by that young lady. And I still am when I tell this story. And is a godly young lady, loves Jesus, reaches out to lost souls. She still does. You know, she's now a missionary. She lives on the mission field in Northern Africa, dealing with a very, very primitive tribe. She's one of the first white people they've ever seen. But she's sharing the love of God to them. And no, she doesn't speak their language yet. She loves Jesus. And she loves them. And her husband is a linguist. He's helping her translate the Bible into their tongue, which is really difficult because they don't have a written language. But they're finding ways to translate it so these people will have the Bible. I hear from her once in a while, but it's hard for her to get letters out because she's in the middle of nowhere. She's had 3 kids on that mission field. But she says the moment she decided that she wanted to serve Jesus for the rest of her life was the day that young man accepted Jesus Christ as Savior and Lord. Yeah. I have to see the needs of people around me, folks. I have to sympathize with their pain. And I have to seize the moment to help. I must seize the moment to help. And that's the third thing the Good Samaritan does. It's the principle, spontaneity. I don't delay. I don't procrastinate. I do what I can now. See, kindness is not something you wait to do. If you wait until you feel kind, it's not going to happen. You act your way into a feeling. It's easier to act your way into a feeling than to feel your way into an action. You don't wait until you feel kindness. You just start acting kind toward people. It's true in rekindling the love of a marriage. Well, when I start feeling love, I'll act loving toward my spouse. No. When you start acting loving toward your spouse, guess what? The feelings return if you start acting in faith. Kindness is not something you feel. It's something you do. I seized the moment to help. It says, he went to him. That's an action. He bandaged his wounds, pouring oil and wine on them. And the Good Samaritan goes overseas to this guy hurting. He walks over to him and he's taking the initiative. He's not waiting for somebody else to come help him. He's doing on his own. He doesn't wait for some neighbor to come help. He doesn't call 911. He doesn't call the church and say, oh, by the way, Pastor, can you come help this guy? He takes the initiative. He reaches out and starts serving. Second, he uses what he has. Now, if he says he used oil and wine, that sounds like a salad dressing to me. Oil and wine, salad dressing. You know why? Because he doesn't have a first aid kit. He does have lunch. He's got lunch, so he uses what he's got. Well, it's actually pretty good because wine is alcohol, and alcohol is cleansing. It's a disinfectant and oil is soothing. That was pretty common in those days. It's what you used to heal the wounded. So disinfecting and soothing a wound. It's a pretty good thing. He's got his Caesar salad on this guy's. Probably took the lettuce and put it on there too. I don't know. But he's using what he's got. He says he bandaged him up. I guarantee you he didn't have any band-aids on his donkey. What did he bandage him? Well, he had to take his own shirt or his own tuning, rip it up into bandages. So he's taking his own clothes, ripping them up, and making bandages for the guy. He's doing what he can, and he's not waiting for a professional. Now, this explains two things to me about kindness. Number one, if I'm going to be kind, I must be willing to be interrupted. Love is not convenient. Love always takes time, and when you're kind, sometimes it means your schedule is going to go in the toilet or the trash. I'm going down the drain. It's thrown out the window because you aren't planning to help this person. Now think of all the excuses this guy could have gotten. He could have said, well, I've got my own problems to deal with. I'm late for a business appointment in Jerusalem. I have to be there to make the presentation. The guy's probably dead already. I probably can't even help him. He's probably beyond help. There's probably a trick. There's probably bandits hiding in the woods behind him. And if I go down there, I'm just going to get jumped and killed. He's probably not really hurt. All that's going through his head. So he had to be brave to be kind. He could have said, well, I don't have time for this. Galatians 6:10 says this, whenever we have the opportunity to help someone, we should do it. But we should give special attention to those who are in the family of believers. It says, whenever we have the opportunity to help, we should. And when I looked up the word whenever, and it means whenever. It means now. You don't wait. Do you remember? It so happened that the priest walked by. It also happened that the Levite walked by. What often seems to be happenstance by a chance in your life is actual divinely planned encounter. God intentionally puts people in pain in your path. If you're going to be kind, it's no accident. I'm guaranteeing you that after this sermon, God's going to put someone in pain in your life. It's not an accident. It's a test. Are you going to be self-centered or are you going to be kind? What do you think has just happened is not happenstance. God plans it to test our character, to grow our character, to make us more like Him. He intentionally puts people in your path so you can grow in kindness and love. Now, I said this teaches me to be willing to be interrupted. In almost every miracle of Jesus, it was when He got interrupted. He was willing to stop and help somebody in pain. Second thing to teach me is that to learn to be kind, I have to move against my fears. Now, this guy here has all kinds of possible fears that he could be afraid of. Remember, this is a very treacherous road. The robbers and thieves are everywhere. So he's going, what if I go over to this guy and the robbers are just waiting, and they're going to come out and they're going to beat me up, and this guy could be part of the robbers. He may not be really hurt. Maybe they're still in the area, or maybe it's a trap, and he's just faking it, laying there to get me to come over and help him, and then robbers are going to rob me. Or what if he rejects my help? This guy's a Jew and I'm a Samaritan, he's prejudiced against me. What if he wakes up and sees my face and goes, what do you think you're doing? What if what if I'm out helping this guy and other people walk by and they think I'm the one that's actually hurting him? And then they do a lawsuit against me because they want to accuse me of hurting the guy. What if I really can't help him? What if he's beyond help? What if he asks me to do something I don't know how to do? You can make all kinds of fears on why you don't want to help. But Proverbs 3:27 and 28 says, never walk away from someone who deserves help. Your hand is God's hand for that person. Never tell your neighbors to wait until tomorrow if you can help them now. I told you many times, the deeper the pain, the fewer words you use. Show up and shut up. It's called being present. You don't have to say anything. Probably better that you don't. When somebody's in pain, you need to do more listening than talking. It's not a contest to see when you can get your point of view across. Just listen. You don't need to say anything profound. You can't say anything profound when they're in the deepest pain. Just show up, but don't delay. Now, this talking about fear brings us one fear that I need to be honest with you about. Often we don't get involved in the path of other people because it raises all kinds of bad emotions. We don't want to get involved in other people's brokenness because it raises the fear of thinking about our own brokenness. Okay? And if I can ignore your pain and ignore your brokenness and ignore your fears and I don't have to face mine, I would say to you, if that's true in your life, then you can't help people because you haven't really dealt with the pain in your own life. As your pastor who loves you, I'm begging you to get some help. Get counseling if you need to. We have, Get some help because it's keeping you from being kind. You can't be kind because you're scared to death that what's going to raise up the fear in you. To get some help, and then you'll be free, and then you can help other people, and you'll be kind. That's right. To be kind, I've got to see the need. To be kind, I've got to be sympathetic to the pain. To be kind, I've got to seize the moment. There's one other thing, and this guy did it. To be kind, I must spend whatever it takes. It's called sacrifice. There's always a price tag. It usually requires a sacrifice of your time. It may sacrifice your money. It certainly will sacrifice your energy and attention. It might even require a sacrifice of your reputation. You've got other people see you helping that person in an office, and you're there, and you get guilt by association. I'll tell you what it else may cost you. It may cost you everything. I've told this story before, but Cyprian was a bishop in Carthage. And Cyprian, and all that means is he was the pastor of the church in Carthage. It's just a different way they used it in the Greek, in Latin. But that's where the word bishop comes from. It basically just means pastor. Because pastor's not a Greek word. Excuse me. Actually, if you were going to call me the Greek word for pastor, you'd have to call me an angel. I don't think any of you are ready to call me Angel Mike. Because that's all angel really means, is messenger. But anyway, there was a plague that struck Carthage, and people were dying right and left. In the meantime, the Emperor Julian had decided that he was going to eliminate Christianity, and he was doing everything he could to badmouth and attack and eliminate believers. People were dying right and left. Cyprian said, he called his people together and he said, we could hide like everybody else. We could pretend that nothing's happening, just ignore the pain and the hurt. Or we could be like Christ and minister even if it cost us our lives. Even if sacrificing for people who don't like us, who hate us, to lay myself down for the enemies, so that I might bring them to Christ. And so his people went out, and the reason it's called the Cyprian plague is because he is so identified with the efforts that tried to help the hurting. People were dying within hours of getting sick. Julian finally wrote, I've tried everything to eliminate Christianity in the empire. I've crucified them, staked them out, burned them, fed them to lions, drowned them at sea, beheaded them, drawn and quartered them, on and on and on. The problem is, I can't get rid of them. You know why? Because the priests of the Roman gods, the pious ones, only care about themselves, and they sit behind their walls and only care about themselves. They only take care of themselves, and they don't reach out, and they're not taking care of the hurting, and they're not taking care of the poor. But these impious Galileans, because that's what he called us, because Jesus was a Galilean, and they were impious because they didn't worship the Roman gods. They cared for the sick, even when it cost them their own lives. Even when it cost them sacrifice, they care. I don't know how I'm ever going to get rid of them. To be kind, I've got to see the need. I've got to be sympathetic. And I've got to do whatever it takes. Then he put the man on his own donkey and took him to an inn, where he took care of him. The next day he gave the innkeeper some silver and gold and told him to take care of the man. He said, if the bill runs higher than that, I'll pay the difference the next time I'm here. He's taking him to a hotel and he doesn't even know the guy. The bill runs higher than that, I'll pay the difference the next time I'm here. And he takes him to the hotel. By the way, who's on the donkey now? The hurt man? Good Samaritan's walking. He nursed him through the night, provides for his care, pays his bill. He doesn't call 911. He does all he can to help. When did he gain from this? Nothing. But God saw it. God saw it. And he's growing a kind heart. Now, Jesus, remember this story? He told to answer the question, who's my neighbor, right? And he said, which of these three people would you say was a true neighbor to the one attacked? The man said, the one who showed him kindness. And Jesus replied, you're right. Now go and do the same. Be kind to the people in need. It's like lending you to the Lord. And he will repay for you the kindness you have shown. Anyone you help, anybody else in pain, God says you're being kind. And that's like a loan to me. God says, I'm not going to be in your debt. You're going to be in mine. I will make sure you are paid for your kindness. So who do you need to be kind to this week? I want you to think. That's your homework. Think of the one person who is not a believer that you know. One person you know who's not a believer, and you see him every day. I want you to start being kind to that person, intentionally kind, no matter how mean they are to you. If you know what their pain is, write it down. If you don't know what their pain is, then you have some learning to do. But I want you to just start being kind to one person who doesn't know the Lord, that you see every day or every week. This is what it means to be counterculture, to do the exact opposite of what our society says to do. And why do we be kind? Because God told us to be kind. God saved you through faith as an act of his kindness. You had nothing to do with it. Being saved is a gift from God. Let's close in prayer. Father, I know I went long today, but I think it's important for us to see that our faith is not just something we say. Our faith is something we do. I pray, Lord, that you would help us to see that what's important is how we treat others. That we show love at all times. Thank you, Father. In your most precious Son's name, amen. God bless you guys.